Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a simple guessing number type game. And then your challenge is going to be to take this and flip it. So basically, I'm going to create a game where the computer generates a random number. And you're going to try to guess the number, and it will give you clues. And then, it'll basically tell you whether you got it right or wrong. So that's fairly straightforward. I'll walk you through the process of creating two classes in order to do that. And then your job for homework is going to be to flip it so that the computer guesses your number. But I want to show you how something like this gets created from scratch so that you understand how all of this works. And again, if you have questions, talk to Mr. Landgraf or talk to me. Okay, so here's how it goes. Basically, there's going to be two classes. There's going to be a driver class, and there's going to be a regular class. And we're going to call this guess number, okay? So I'm going to say public class guess number. So that's our class. And we're going to go ahead and save this. And, it makes sense to create a folder for all your work. For each project you create, you should probably put it in a separate folder. Now notice that the save as, that's the same as the class that I defined. So the guess number, that's where all the good stuff's going to happen. We also need a driver. So we're going to call this public class guess number. You can call it anything you want, but by convention I usually say, I usually call a driver. And I usually, call it the same as the class, but with driver added at the end of it. So, okay, so the thing about a guess number driver, what the job of the driver is basically to instantiate the class and then call the play method from within the class. All right, so that's all we need to do. Remember, this is a comment, shows up in green. It's for humans, not for the computer. So that'll just give a little bit of information about what we're about to write. So remember the public static void main string args. You just sort of have to memorize this. But every Java program has one class with one main method in it. And the job of the main method is to instantiate the class. The way to instantiate the class is we're going to say guess number, and then I don't know what we want to call it. Let's just call it game equals new guess number. All right. So what this does is this creates a new instance of the guess number class. It's called game. This is a variable name. You can name it anything you want as long as it's not a private reserved word. It can't be private. It can't be called public. It can't be called class. It has to be called something that is not already used by Java. So game is probably fine. We could call it Harry. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but it's probably a better idea to give it a name that references what it is basically. So now that we've created an instance of the guess number class, we've called it game. We're going to say game dot, and this addresses that instance of the class, play. And what that will do is it will look for that newly instantiated guess number object called game, and it's going to look for a method, a public method called play, and it's going to call it. And that is it. And that basically runs it. So now what we need to do is put the rest of our code in guess number. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go back to guess number. And this guess number is going to prompt you to enter information. So what we need to do is we need to say import java.util.scanner. And what that does is that brings in the scanner object. This is, one thing that you will probably have to do is go back to your previous labs, open it up so that you know how to do these things. You can copy and paste from the old labs to put all the code in. If you want to check your spelling or check what order you put things in, go back to the old labs. That's why it's helpful to have folders where you sort of organize everything. Okay, so public class guess number. Great. So now what we're going to do with this, we have to think about what we want to do. I guess what we want to do first, let me create a series of comments here so that we can. Ideally, we want to generate, this is called pseudocode, by the way, generate a random number for the answer the computer is thinking of, right? Spelling doesn't count technically in a comment, but it is good to spell things correctly. So you generate a random number for the answer the computer's thinking of. Okay, and then until the player, well, let me use another language. Let's say while the player has not guessed it correctly, I am taking some time to write out what I want to do in English first. This is a good practice. Even if you're on the AP exam and you're doing a short answer, you still want to take time to just jot down your thoughts in English first. It's much quicker to spot bugs and flaws in thinking in English than it is in code. So do this first. So while the player has not guessed it correctly, ask the player to guess. And then when the player puts in a number, check to see whether the number, well, let's just do this. Let's say we ask the player to guess, and then we save their guess into a variable. And then if the guess is greater than the answer, say, what do we want to say? 2. If it's greater than the answer, we want to say too high, right? And if the guess is lower, is lower than the, I can't type, than the answer, say too low. Okay, now some of you out there will probably have it say verbally abuse the player and say rude things. You know, I can't prevent you from doing that technically, but boy, no class. So look, here's what I do. I say if the guess is greater than the answer, say too high. If the guess is lower than the answer, say too low. Otherwise, computer language, we could also say else or otherwise. Say, you guessed it. Now, why don't we have to say if the guess is the same as the answer, say that? Well, we know that if the guess is greater, if it's not greater than the answer, and it's not lower than the answer, it must be the answer, right? And so that's why we can say otherwise or or else, right? If it's not one of the other two, we know that it's the third one. That's why I'm not doing another if statement. And the compiler generally likes that because this covers all instances. If I said if the guess is greater than the answer, say this. If it's lower than the answer, say that. If it's the same as the answer, say this. The computer sometimes will kick back an error and say, well, yeah, but what if it's not any of those? Because the computer's kind of dumb. It doesn't realize what we know, that this covers truly all circumstances. If this, if that, otherwise, in all other cases, say this. And this covers us because in all other cases, it has to be equal. Okay, so all right. And say that the guess is, the same. So we exit the loop. Because remember, we're saying while the player has not guessed it correctly. So at some point we have to signal to break out of the loop. So what we should probably do here is create a variable to keep track of if the game is won. Yeah? Awesome. Okay, so that sets you up. What you basically want to do now is we just want to kind of say, okay, public, because we want this method to be, oh, it's all green. That's a problem. Why is it all green? We have to exit our comment here. So let's say */. There we go. Color is a big hint. So if you're not doing it correctly, you missed a bracket somewhere, you'll notice the color looks odd. So just make sure that you pay attention to that. There we go. That makes my OCD feel better. It's all matching now. Okay, so public void, play. Now this is the visibility. This tells you that this play method can be called from outside the GuessNumber class. And we know that it has to be public because this outside the GuessNumber class is going to be calling it. If this were marked private, it wouldn't be able to call play. Public. Void means it doesn't return anything. It's just printing stuff out to the screen. Play is the name of the method, and we're not sending any parameters in, so we're just going to seal it that way. And this, my friends, is where we do all of this stuff. Make sense? Okay. So with that, I will let you guys kind of work on that. Do these things. And if you do all of that, then you basically got this lab solved. But this sets you up in the right way. Okay? Have fun.